All right. Well, I appreciate everyone's patience as we work through a couple technical difficulties. And this presentation, when we get to the end, I will have a QR code that you can scan, and it'll take you to a resource toolkit. And then I'll share a PDF of the slides with Natalie to share out with all of you. So happy to help in any way possible. Again, my name is Justine Hollingshead. I work at NC State, and I'm one of our assistant vice chancellors. My primary responsibilities are actually emergency preparedness and crisis response. So that is part of my role with the institution. And I also work on our postvention efforts, managing if there's a death on campus, particularly our students. And then also if we have large scale events or activities. So we do a number of those on campus. So we have a small group here. If you want to type in the chat who you are and what institution you're with, that would be a huge help for me and probably some other folks that are participating today. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to stop me. And I know where we go until noon, so you never want to be the person that stands between a group and lunch. So I'll definitely be mindful of time. So a lot of folks ask, how did we get to this point? Some of these images will likely look familiar to you. The Virginia Tech shooting, Charlottesville, Virginia, wildfires out in California, which is actually near Pepperdine University that you see in the top right. The bottom right is actually a large multi-building fire that we had in downtown Raleigh that displaced a number of our off-campus students with a catastrophic fire. And then the last image is at UNC Wilmington following Hurricane Florence in one of their high-rise buildings that you can see all the furniture outside of it. All the furniture in the building was a complete loss. The building was flooded, all 6 floors. So there are many images that we could show. This is from Charlotte with the shooting that occurred on campus there in the spring of 2019. And then, of course, we have our everyday impacts, civil unrest, protests. This image is from Harvard-Yale, the Harvard-Yale game, and mumps outbreaks that occur. So we think in COVID terms right now, cyber attacks, and then, of course, the coronavirus. So there are many everyday impacts that occur on our campuses, and I'm just not sure that we have been as prepared as higher ed. If you listen to the panel this morning, I shared that we're woefully unprepared in higher education, and hopefully the tide will shift in a direction toward people being more prepared. In most higher ed programs, there's not courses in emergency preparedness and response. We're hopefully going to see a shift in that direction. We've actually developed a 3-credit-hour class that will launch this fall in collaboration with our Division of Academic and Student Affairs and our College of Education. And we did a pilot class actually right after Hurricane Florence happened. And at the time, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Pat Leonard, who has recently passed away, she was a huge supporter of in higher education and student affairs in particular, needing to do more training and education. So some people ask, what is preparedness? What does that mean? And you could probably ask all 9 of us in this session, and we all might have a slightly different answer to what that is. But in the basic sense, so the basic components: to have knowledge and awareness about what's going on around you and the situation, to understand what it will take to survive in a situation, whether that's an active shooter, whether that's a hurricane, a tornado, coronavirus, and being able to adapt. That's probably adaptability and flexibility go hand in hand. What planning and readiness looks like. So I have a background in EMS. I've been deployed following a number of hurricanes, and after the earthquake in Haiti, was deployed there for 2 weeks. And then following Hurricane Florence, I was actually reassigned to UNC Wilmington for a month to assist in their recovery efforts on campus. And what does self-reliance and personal responsibility look like? Folks on our campus will tell you that I preach pretty much that if you're not prepared personally, then it's going to be very difficult for you to help the institution out. And for you, if you don't feel comfortable in that your family is safe or that your home is safe, it's going to be really tough for you to extract yourself from your personal situation and help out on campus. So personal preparedness goes hand in hand with professional preparedness. And then resilience and sustainability. So all of these components are a part of what is the overarching umbrella for preparedness. This is a snapshot of preparedness actions that is put out by FEMA. They do a national household survey every year, and from that survey comes this data. So we know that there are 6 preparedness actions that the average person thinks about or needs to take, everything from having supplies to last 3 or more days, talking with others, attending local meetings or gatherings that could even occur on campus, participating in emergency drills, and then making an emergency plan. In 2020, 68% of people took 3 or more of these preparedness actions. We know from the research that if you take at least one, ideally more of these actions, you're going to be more likely to have a plan and be able to execute that plan. And the vast majority of people took at least one of these actions. So you have to think about, are you ready? And I would assume you all work in some role in housing on campus, and what that looks like for you and what your role is at the institution. One, do you know what your role is at the institution and within housing? We certainly all figured out different roles as we've gone along with our COVID response. But for you to know, what is your role if there is an emergency situation on campus? So the purpose of planning, and it's one area that I would say we probably don't do the best job at from a planning perspective, but the goals of that are to minimize the damage that occurs. So hurricanes are a good example, snowstorms, power outages, water main breaks. You of course want to minimize damage to life safety and physical structures, ensure the safety of individuals, protecting records and assets. You need to think about that personally. So if you lose your home, if there's a tornado or a flood, do you have all of your vital records or important papers locked up in a waterproof, fireproof safe? Allow for self-sufficiency for at least 72 hours. That's what the national information would show. So you've got to be able to self-sustain for that period of time. Sometimes it could be 14 plus days, depending on the situation. We're certainly seeing a lot coming out of Texas with the recent snowstorm, and how long people have gone without power, how long people have gone without having access to resources that they need. And then what is your plan for continuity of operations? I'd be curious, and you can use the raised hand feature. How many of you have a continuity of operations plan for housing on your campus? This will be a little audience participation, so you can do the raised hand. Are they able to do that?
I'm looking, Justine, if we can.
No, it might not.
Oh yeah, someone raised the hand.
All right, so only Anthony.
You'll just have to make sure that you're out of full screen mode to be able to see the participants and stuff.
All right. So, for you at your institution, having a plan for your continuity of operations and what that looks like is really important. And even if you're an assistant hall director, if you're an assistant director in housing, if you work in assignments versus the residential life side, so it's really important to make sure you understand what those operations look like. So I'm going to run through quickly a checklist, and most of this relates to you as a person, not necessarily in your role at the institution, although there are certainly some crossover items that are important. So one is to have a communication plan. And this is not just for on campus, but for you personally, with you and your family or people that you care about. So oftentimes landlines can be physically down, cell phone lines could be overwhelmed, power outages. So how are you going to communicate? What does that look like? After actually a hurricane that happened in Texas, the app Zello, which is like a walkie-talkie app, came into a little bit more prominence in the sense that it uses Wi-Fi so you can communicate. So you don't have to rely on cell phone connection, but you can use the app to be able to communicate much like you would with a two-way radio. So if you have access to Wi-Fi, which they found after hurricane, the hurricane at the time in Texas, that people were able to get access to Wi-Fi, they have power, but the cell phone lines were overwhelmed and landlines were down. So just something to think about in how you'll communicate. You need to prepare to be safe in your home. Do you have emergency supplies for your home, enough to survive for a couple of weeks? If you had to care for an ill family member, if you have supplies, if you have children, if somebody has a chronic illness, and you have to assume that there are few to no resources available. As I mentioned, I work in EMS. I'm a volunteer with a local EMS service, and after Hurricane Fran, which happened decades ago at this point in Raleigh, where we had actual sustained hurricane winds inland in the city of Raleigh, that there were times where we just couldn't respond. So you could call 911 and need something, but you're not going to get police, fire, or EMS. And definitely now we have protocols in place where until the worst of the storm passes, we just don't respond for safety reasons. So you have to assume in some circumstances, there just aren't going to be resources available to you. No home safety practices. What do you do in a power outage? Do you know where your utility and water shutoffs are? Do you have smoke and carbon monoxide detectors? I certainly hope so with today's day and age. Obviously, teaching children how to dial 911, learning first aid and CPR, and then how to use a fire extinguisher. And do you have a fire extinguisher on every floor of your home? And if you had to use it, have you ever used one? And actually, most housing folks really have, because we train RAs in how to use fire extinguishers. So I think that's probably something that skill-wise is more prominent with housing folks. Prepare to stay healthy. So again, we've seen this a lot with COVID. We wouldn't have probably predicted this a year ago, but hospitals can be overwhelmed even during normal flu and cold season, which we're in now. Emergency services could be delayed or unavailable. Having health supplies, like having a first aid kit, I think most folks probably do, but that's good to check that. Things expire, so you should check that annually when you're doing your other safety checks. And then practice good health habits. Clearly that's more prominent for us now. And prepare to be able to take care of family members who may need care at home. And how would you do that, and can you do that in the environment that you have now? Have an evacuation plan. So if you had to evacuate from your neighborhood, where would you go? What are the meeting sites? Do your kids, do your loved ones, do your friends know where that is? So if you just all of a sudden weren't at home, would they know where you're at and how to get there? Know your school's evacuation plan. So if you have kids in school, my wife and I, we have four-legged kids, but we live in a development where there's a brand new elementary school just a stone's throw away from our house. So it's important we know what their evacuation plan is, because if they go into lockdown or have to evacuate, it's likely going to impact my neighborhood. Make arrangements for your pets to take them with you. If you're a pet owner, you have a responsibility, they need to go with you. And most places now, most municipalities have at least one shelter that allows pets. And again, don't leave your pets behind. If you're afraid and don't have resources, they likely don't either, and will need access to the resources just like you. And then make a family drill plan and actually practice. That's the one thing, it looks great on paper, but then you have to actually practice. Like, how long does it take you to get out of the house? How long does it take you if you had to scale down the back of your house out the window? Can you do it? And how long would it take you to do it if you had to? And then prepare a go kit. So we use the raised hand feature again. How many of you have a go kit that, you know, I won't go into details about your car and your office and your home, but let's just say at least one go kit somewhere. So these are a kit that you would have personal, specific, essential items. You know, if you had to be 3 days away from home, so see a few folks raising their hand, including supplies for your pets, you know, in a portable container, a tub or a backpack. I keep a backpack in my car that has emergency supplies. We have a go box in our garage that if I wasn't here and my wife needed to head out, everything's in one container. You just grab the container and throw it in the car. So you should be ready at all times for that immediate evacuation, because you never know what's going to happen. Some additional items to include in there, you know, some personal identification, even if it's a photocopy of it, because obviously you only have one driver's license. You know, have hard copy of everything, you know, so your emergency contacts with phone numbers, cash and some coins, because sometimes credit card machines don't work, an extra set of house and car keys just in case you needed those, physical maps of the area, like old-timey maps, versus if you can't get to something on your phone, and then important documents. So some of the challenges that we have in higher education, we cover disparate geographic areas. So some of our campuses are big and have multiple physical locations. For us at NC State, as an example, we have 3 physical areas of campus that are separated by 4-lane highways. So, you know, that becomes a challenge for us, and how do we manage? Our population changes day to day, sometimes semester to semester and year to year. So you're constantly having to retrain and reframe things for folks. We all operate complex enterprises in addition to academic programs. Higher education is a business. Our business is educating people, but there's still functions that have to happen within that. Our governance is highly varied, complex, widely dispersed. Sometimes it's a campus versus a state system. Sometimes you have, in state of North Carolina, we have a system for all the UNC campuses. So you could also have connection to your local government. So it just varies. We don't operate business hour schedules. So although there are some people on campus that work 8 or 9 to 5, but for the most part, housing in particular, it's not just a standard business hour schedule. So that fluctuates. Typically, only campus personnel can run campus operations. Hopefully you have conversations, MOUs potentially with your city government, and talking to them, city officials, that if you needed assistance, you know, what would that look like, in asking for mutual aid? But could they come in and run a residence hall? Probably not. So you need to think about how deep is your bench, and how easily could you train up other people to help do things. And then there's typically a lack of awareness and education as it relates to emergency preparedness, which I've already talked a little bit about. And finally, we're not really a culture of asking for help. In higher education, we want to be able to figure it out. We want to be able to do it. It's that sense of pride. It's almost as if we can't do it on our own, that it makes us feel like we're less than or inferior in some ways. So, you know, for us to be able to figure out, how do you ask for help? So as an example, in public safety, police, fire, and EMS, mutual aid and asking for assistance is common. It happens every day. So a fire company, for example, typically they're not the only, you don't just send one fire truck to a structure fire. So there could be multiple fire trucks from different agencies. They work together. They have a unified command structure. The same in EMS, the same with law enforcement. So it's common. It doesn't make you feel inferior in the sense of having to ask for help. So in higher ed, we're going to have to flip that. It's going to have to be that culture of asking for help, because there are going to be times when we need that. Now, we're all going through COVID right now, but let's say if it was an active shooter on a sister campus or a campus down the road, or a hurricane or a building collapse, would you be able to send personnel to go and assist? And would you be willing to ask for that help? At some point in time, you've drained all your own resources. So you really do need to reach out and find a way to get assistance from another location. So being situationally aware, having that accurate and rapid perception of what's going on around you, being able to comprehend a lot of things all at once. And sometimes for folks that really have to take time to process, that's difficult to do in emergency situation, because you've got to be able to think through what's going on and try to get to the point where we're able to make a decision. One of the things we talked about this morning in the panel is that it's been really hard for some younger staff members to not be a part of that decision-making process. When you're in an emergency, things are happening so quickly that it's very difficult to bring everyone to the table and be able to say, okay, well, what do you think, Justine? Or what do you think, Anthony? What do you think, Anna? And it could be, here's what we're doing. We just need you to execute that. So helping for people to understand that that's how it's going to be and to understand what their role is in the situation. So if you've done any work with the National Incident Management System, Incident Command, that you'll be familiar with the phases of disaster preparedness. So there's 5 phases: mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and continuity. To give you an example, in our COVID situation, COVID world, COVID land, as I say, we're kind of in that response, recovery, continuity. I feel like every day is a new response sometimes. That was really what the fall was like. But the spring has been more recovery and continuity. So thinking about how do you work through those phases, they tie together, they build on each other. Some of them you would do, ahead of time, mitigation and preparedness, of course, response in the moment, and then recovery and continuity as you come out of the disaster. So all these things, NIMS, ICS, COOP, EOC, EAP, it's alphabet soup to some folks, and they go, I don't really understand all of these things. All of this information is publicly available and free. So, and I'll share here in just a few minutes resources that you can access from anywhere and be able to start putting together training. Happy to share any information we do at NC State, but you really need to start thinking about how do we train people on a regular basis, and how do we do that continuing education. So we do that for a lot of things, even in the field of higher education. In housing in particular, and thinking about, every year we train RAs and how to do things. We train hall staff. You've got to get into the sense of beyond doing fire drills and how to use a fire extinguisher. How do you manage a situation if there's an active shooter? Young kids are actually far more trained when it comes to sheltering in place or evacuating than adults are, because we're teaching it in schools, unfortunately. So emergency support functions, this is international. So the elements that you see here on the screen, transportation, recovery, human resources, firefighting, these are international support functions that happen in any element of a disaster or emergency preparedness. So for you to think about, where does housing fit? So communications, you've got to know what's going on campus. You've got to be able to communicate with residents. You've got to be able to communicate with the campus community. Your housing unit is likely tied to mass care and shelter as well. So if you had to stand a shelter up on campus, housing would likely be tapped, housing staff, to be able to help run that. I tell folks in our division that they are deployable to me to really do anything, whether it's helping in the dining hall, which housing staff helps with, in particular RAs, that's pretty standard. But if we had to stand up a shelter and you're the director of the Career Center, I may be sending you there to run the shelter because that's one of the elements that we are responsible for in student affairs. Recovery, so everybody has a responsibility for recovery efforts. That could be from a major power outage, a water main break. We actually at NC State had a major water main break the first week in January, and we actually lost a building. Thankfully, we have COVID right now because we were able to take that building offline. The basement of the building had 6 feet of water in it, and we lost all of the infrastructure of the building for heating, air, and electrical. And then public health and medical, where your health center might not be a part of your student affairs, but we've all collaborated with the health center over the course of the past year. So you may have a medical center, you may have a hospital that's connected as part of your campus, which are great resources, but also your student health center. And hopefully we've all come to work and know them more. And then finally, academic support. We all have a hand in that, but in particular, now with virtual content delivery for classes that may be occurring in residence halls. So students may want to get together in small groups. How do you provide support to that? What is the infrastructure like with wireless connectivity? So this is, and again, you'll have access to this afterwards, but this is called Community Lifeline. So if you look at the top, the components: law enforcement, safety and security, food, water, shelter, health and medical, energy, communications, transportation, including your campus resources, and then the local community, and then hazardous materials. So if you think about, you've got to know what is the status of each of those, what are shortcomings, limiting factors, actions taken, what priority is safety and security? Is it more of a priority over health and medical or over energy? What does that look like? What you may think in working in housing might be different than your director of physical plant. And then what are critical issues? And if there is a failure in something, let's say you have a hazmat incident, how long is it going to take before you can bring that location back online? So these are elements to think about, and you need to do this as a collective effort. So if housing were to just operate in a vacuum, you may miss a piece that's connected to transportation. They may say, well, you've got this great apartment complex that's 2 miles from campus that the university owns, but we can't get buses to it. So how do you get students to campus? So you really need to think through, and that's why they frame it as a community lifeline. So all the different components that go together. This is a traditional incident command structure organizational chart. So you would have an overall incident commander. Typically, that's going to be somebody on your campus from environmental health and safety, emergency management. These are traditional elements: a safety officer, a public information officer. They'd be speaking on behalf of the university. And then these are the 4, what I call buckets. So you have operations, planning, logistics, and finance and administration. I also refer to it as the FLOP. So finance, logistics, operations, and planning. So if you don't have this structure on your campus, it may seem really fragmented or decentralized, and people not being able to collaborate together. So I'd encourage you, if you have a voice and can share that in trying to get to a collective place of having a unified plan, at least how you're going to address an incident when it occurs. So having a plan is really important. Some of the takeaways and things that we've talked about: you should be personally prepared, work through your emergency management. Everything needs to be documented. Right now, all universities have access to FEMA money, in particular for vaccination clinics. So as you may be working in collaboration with your student health center or your hospital, if you have a hospital on campus, and they have access to FEMA money, one thing we've never seen with FEMA is that you can get advance money. I don't know how that magic is happening, but you have to have a plan in place first before that occurs. How to function within NIMS, the National Incident Management System. So having an incident command structure, an emergency operations center. Do you have staff in housing that serve in your emergency operations center? And what if your director was gone, your executive director, your associate director, and all of a sudden you're a hall director and you have to go to the EOC? Do you know what to do and what the expectations are? What is the role of student affairs? And we certainly have realized we have a much greater role than folks have probably ever given us in the past. How do you communicate? So is it social media? Do you have a call center? Do you use email? Slack as a tool to use to communicate? So figure out how you're going to do that and make sure people know. Documentation, when you get access to the QR code that I'm going to share here in a few minutes, you'll have access to federal forms. FEMA requires, I'll just bring this up. FEMA requires that when you're requesting refunds and you're requesting reimbursement, that you keep track of information. A form that is really important, whether you're housing, whether you're the physical plan, whether your emergency operations, is this activity log, ICS form 214. That is critical, and most times you are going to have to keep track of the information that you're doing. And if you don't, it could mean the difference between getting reimbursement and not. So having a memo of understanding within your state and among other schools, it allows you to help each other quickly. So it's important to work on those ahead of time. It takes a lot of time if you're in the middle of an emergency and you have to try to say, hey, the sister institution down the road that has staff that can come help us, but you don't have an MOU in place. Few other things, doing training and preparation, so tabletops and drills, whether that's an actual in-person drill or if it's something that is done as a tabletop version, you can also do those virtually. And then that includes civil unrest and protests as well. So if something does happen, like we saw in January, is there an impact to your campus? Resources and deployable assets. So let's say you had to go to another school and help them. Do you have resources that you could send down? After the Hurricane Florence with UNC Wilmington, we were actually able to provide furniture because we're a UNC system, a state agency. So it was just an easy transfer of assets. What if you're short-staffed? How do you backfill staff? So housing in particular, we've taken it on the chin with COVID and isolation and quarantine. Do you have other staff in your division or campus that can help you if you are short-staffed? That goes for adverse weather as well. If you have a union on your campus, what is the impact of the union and how do you interact and work with them, particularly in times of a disaster declaration? If you do go somewhere to help, if you are deployed somewhere to another campus, don't be a burden. Plan to go and be self-sufficient. We took a whole team of staff from NC State down to UNC Wilmington after the hurricane, and we made our own plans. We took care of ourselves when it came to food and lodging, because the institution or the entity that you're going to help, they have so much going on. The last thing you want is to be a burden in that situation. Most people want to stay in a 5-star hotel. Not usually housing folks, but know that you're going to be sleeping on the floor of a gym likely. You should be lucky if you probably get a cot in that situation. Be prepared to do what needs to be done. This morning, as an example, with one of our testing centers, one of our associate deans is our site manager on Tuesday mornings for the testing center. So it probably wasn't something she thought would be in her job description just a short year ago. The relationships you have on campus and in your state, even within SEAHO and working together and trying to share information is invaluable. So Ready Campus is a resource that you can have access to blank templates for an emergency operations plan, access to resources on calendars and when you should be doing things. So it's, again, a great resource. Ready.gov. The Red Cross and CDC. The Red Cross and CDC have actual templates for you personally to kind of do your own family and personal plan. You can actually do it and download it to your phone. So if you need to be able to get access to it if you don't have Wi-Fi, or you can also print it out. These are some useful apps. I talked to you about Zello. Slack is a communication app. GroupMe, the Red Cross. FEMA has a great app, and then this is one of my all-time favorite weather apps. It's called My Radar, so that's a pretty useful tool as well. And then FEMA makes publicly available training open source. So Stop the Bleed is a layperson training course that you can do to help people know what to do if there is an active shooter and they were isolated and needed to stop bleeding, or help save someone's life. And then FEMA has a number of courses that are readily available that you can do online. So you could assign to people and say, I just need you to go do this and tell me once you've done it, or you could facilitate it in a format similar to what we're doing today. So this toolkit, which I'm going to go ahead and click to this is a QR code, so you can get your phone out, you can scan in the QR code, and it'll take you to, so while you're doing that, you might be fumbling with getting your phone out. So I'm going to take this quick second, click back over here, do this. So when you scan this, it will take you to a website that we put together at NC State that we're making publicly available. So it's a toolkit on emergency preparedness and crisis response. So all of the resources that I shared with you that we've talked about, so different online resources, and of course, oops, got this little block here. Do this. So the courses, IS 700B is something that you can do through FEMA. And bring this one up here. So a lot of the things I talked to you about personally, how to document and insure your property, are you ready, guide to citizen preparedness, family communication plan, all of these things are available to you publicly. And if you go to this site, you can get to all of these links. So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to be able to answer any questions that you might have. And this is a webinar format, correct, Natalie?
It is not, Justine.
Oh, okay.
So folks have put some questions in the chat box and they've been really good. Can you see that or no?
Let me see. Well, yes, of course I can. Just should have looked. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
How do you work to coach college students on what self-sufficiency they rely on us? Right. Well, that is a great question. So we actually have a similar website resource for students that our emergency management puts together, and we push information out monthly to the entire campus community on preparedness. So, you know, we've also shared pushed information with our housing folks to students and their parents on, for example, coming back this spring, to have some kind of little go bag that if you did have to go to isolation and quarantine, you would have resources available to you in your room, so you wouldn't be scrambling for those. So, you know, part of it's pushing that information out and to say we can only do but so much. To go tubs, one for food. That's great, Kelly. Good idea for maps. If you ever want to volunteer, EMS is a good way to get that start. Institution require housing personnel. Yes, so we require our, in some units, housing is one of them, associate and assistant directors and above to complete our the ICS courses, and we track that. Let's see, at University of South Carolina, Columbia, they require most staff members to complete IS 100 and 700. Those are both good to start with for sure. And then we do an annual drill. We actually did it as a tabletop this past fall, which it seemed like kind of a burden to have to do it in the middle of a pandemic, but you still have to be prepared for other things like ice and snow. Link to a survey for the present. Oh, okay. So I think those are, I'm caught up on the questions. Anything that I can do to help, I'm happy to do so. Housing is my first love. I started in housing and worked in housing for 11 years at NC State, 5 prior to that at Ball State in Indiana, and was also a hall director when I was in grad school. So housing is my first love. And if you can work in housing, you can do anything. That's my other belief. So it prepares you for everything, including COVID. Andrew says, not sure that this session is on the survey. That could be good or bad, depending how you want to look at it, if you're the presenter or not. Not sure what the answer to that is, Natalie.
Thank you for that feedback, Andrew. I will look into it. I don't know why necessarily, but I'll look into it. I don't know if you wanted to give any final thoughts, Justine, or.
My parting thoughts to you would be to work on training and being prepared, both personally and professionally, and be the person that helps to lead that effort. If you don't have someone that does, make that your thing, and help to give back to your community on campus and off. It's nothing but time, as I say. All the resources are publicly available to you, so it's really not a financial burden. It's time and effort.
Well, if we all want to take a virtual kind of round of applause for Justine and kind of imparting her wisdom, I am not an emergency management person, but I've done the NIMS, and I do think it's incredibly useful information, not only as a professional, but also in your daily life as well. And so thank you all very much. The next thing we have is a break for lunch, and then we will have 2 more programmatic sessions to round out SEAHO U for the day.
All right, thanks everyone. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Good luck to you, and be safe.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.